Hello and welcome back to A Case of Books. Today I'm going to talk through what I read in February and March. Because there's quite a lot of books, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through all of them really quickly, but then I've picked out my 5 favourites to talk about in a little bit more detail at the end of the video. First up is the picture book by Chelsea Clinton, obviously daughter of Hilary. In She Persisted, Chelsea Clinton has picked out the stories of 13 real-life women who changed the world in some ways, and it tells their story in a really lovely, straightforward and inspiring way. It's a great book to dip in and out of if you have young children. Next up is a middle grade book by husband and wife writing team Katie and Kevin Tsang, who are, full disclosure, also friends of mine. This is a hilarious and charming look at Samwo, who's an incredibly appealing hero who is learning to be brave, and it's gorgeously illustrated by Nathan Reed. They are perfect for fans of books like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and the Tom Gates series, and the next one in the series is out in the summer. Next up is a very classic feeling children's adventure story, which is The Children of Castle Rock, which is written by Natasha Farrant. This is the story of 3 very different children who are thrown together into a high-stakes adventure after they all attend the same rather eccentric boarding school in the Scottish Highlands. It's a lovely, fun and pacey read about adventure and finding your own identity. Fans for classic and traditional stories like Enid Blyton, but also kind of new takes on stories along those lines like Emma Carroll writes. Next up are 2 books about the fight for women's suffrage in the UK. Make More Noise, an anthology of different middle grade writers about the anniversary that happened earlier this year, and Things a Bright Girl Can Do by Sally Nicholls, which is a YA novel about the fight for votes for women. Overall, the anthology is really lovely, although naturally, as always with anthologies, some stories I prefer to others, but it's a really great read that you can dip in and out of. And then I absolutely love Things a Bright Girl Can Do. I found it historically interesting, really inspiring, and also it's just a really great read. And you should definitely pick it up if you are fans of feminist historical fiction like Codename Verity or Out of the Easy. Next up is a YA novel that I am sure that you have already heard of, and it's Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I must admit, I came into this with exceptionally high expectations, which is perhaps not fair, but because of the buzz around the book, it just has become one of those titles. I wanted this to be a kind of new favourite YA novel, and instead it is one that I just really enjoyed, which sounds ridiculous to say I just really enjoyed it, but the expectation was so high. I found this to be incredibly readable, fast-paced, very moving, and I'm thrilled that it exists and that it's doing well, but I could have done with about 100 less pages, basically. It is super cinematic though, and I think that actually the story will really come to life on the big screen, and I'm excited to see the film. It's one for fans of the big epic fantasy YA like Laini Taylor and Leigh Bardugo. Next is an iconic graphic novel, Mouse by Art Spiegelman. I had actually never read this before, but I was very privileged to be able to interview Art to celebrate his 70th birthday for Penguin, and I'll leave a link to that interview in the description box. So I read this to prepare for that and basically saw what all the fuss was about. I'm sure that you know this. It's this graphic novel story of his family during the Holocaust. It's incredibly moving and sobering read. And then I'm actually going to do recommendations the wrong way around because Mouse is such a famous book, and I'll say if you like Mouse, I would say you should seek out things like Persepolis and The Arab of the Future for other graphic memoirs. Next up is the first adult novel by the brilliant YA author Holly Bourne. This is a blackly funny story of a woman called Tori, who is the author of an Eat, Pray, Love-esque memoir, and what happens when she has a bit of a personal, professional and romantic crisis. It's very funny and full of great observational humour, but it's also incredibly moving and quite redemptive by the end. It's sort of like a millennial, more sarcastic Bridget Jones's diary. And if you enjoyed that, or Bryony Gordon's The Wrong Knickers, then I definitely think you should pick this up. So next up is a real Marmite book. I really didn't get on with this, but I do know a lot of people who really enjoyed it. Plot-wise, it's about a young woman who is trying to write her PhD and is having a bit of a mental health crisis, who meets a merman and falls in love with him. I wanted this to be like weird in a whimsical way and super sexy, and it is weird, but I found it kind of crass for the sake of crassness. I didn't find it at all sexy. I found the main character incredibly unlikable, but without any real depth, and I also thought the plot was super predictable, and I guessed what was going to happen at the end almost immediately. But I wouldn't say it was a bad book, it just really is not the sort of thing I enjoy reading. If you're a fan of The First Bad Man by Miranda July though, I would say definitely check it out. Next up is a psychological thriller, which I really don't read many of, but I read Clare Mackintosh's Let Me Lie because she was a guest at our Lush book club. It's a really pacey, twisty thriller about a young woman whose parents have died, and she gets some information that reveals there might be more to that story than she initially let on. As well as being really plotty, it also deals with sort of big issues to do with mental health, alcoholism, and sort of family issues. If you like books about the lengths and the lies that normal people will go to, things like Ruth Ware and The Couple Next Door, then definitely check this one out. Next up is an experimental novella by Jeremy Gavron, where he has constructed his story made almost entirely of lines from other people's novels. This is a really interesting read, and there is a through narrative that you can connect with. It does work, but it did sort of end up as being a bit more style over substance for me. So if you enjoy experimental fiction where you can indulge in structural playfulness, even if the story isn't quite as emotionally engaging as usual, things like Multiple Choice by Alexandra Zambra, then definitely have a look at this. Okay, last up for this section is the new Trainspotting book, Dead Men's Trousers by Irvine Welsh. So I read this because I interviewed him, both for a written piece, which I'll link below, and at a live event. And full disclosure, I wasn't expecting to enjoy this. It's not my sort of thing, kind of hyper masculinity, don't enjoy reading. But honestly, I got really sucked in. It's very funny, it's very dark, and it's incredibly engaging. Obviously, the main comparison is if you love Trainspotting, you will enjoy this, but I also would recommend it if you don't think you like that sort of thing. I enjoyed it much more than I was expecting to. Okay, so on to my top 5 highlights from what I read over the last couple of months. And the first book is Katherine Webber's second appearance on this list with her new YA novel, Only Love Can Break Your Heart, which is published in August in the UK. Its brilliant, complicated heroine, Reiko, is a 17-year-old girl living in Palm Springs, and this book is about family and friendship and first love. It's about grief and loss, and it's also about the way we tell teenage girls that their power is their sexuality and then we punish them for using it. This is a book that manages to be incredibly wise and thoughtful and moving, whilst also being so much fun to read. It's got brilliant desert settings and a massive prom scene, and it reminds me of those really brilliant sort of early 2000s high school films almost. And in terms of books, it's for fans of intelligent contemporary YA, books like Eleanor and Park, Anna and the French Kiss, or Perks of Being a Wallflower. I've got one more YA book for you, and it's another one where I really enjoyed the author's debut, but then I loved their follow-up even more, and this is State of Sorrow by Melinda Salisbury, who's the author of the Senator's Daughter trilogy. This is an absolutely brilliant, really smart, older teenage read about a teenage girl's sorrow who is part of the sort of ruling political family and finds herself forced into a position where she has to decide whether she wants to sort of step up to that position or let her recently discovered brother take on the responsibilities. It's a really clever, tricksy book that's moving and funny and takes in ideas of loyalty and politics and family, and it was really enjoyable reading a YA book that really gets into sort of knotty ideas about politics and loyalty. I raced through it even though it is quite long, and I absolutely cannot wait for the sequel. If you like absorbing fantasy with a political edge, things like Owen Hamilton or V. Schwab, then I definitely think you should have a look out for this. Next up is the middle grade debut by YA author Katherine Doyle. She's the author of the Vendetta trilogy, but this is her first venture into middle grade and it's absolutely magical. It's called The Stormkeeper's Island, and it's about a boy called Fionn who goes to stay with his grandfather over the summer because his mother is too unwell to look after him and his sister. And whilst there, he discovers that the island has a whole host of magical secrets that his family is intimately woven into. It's a really gorgeous, atmospheric, magical read, but it's also really, really funny. It feels very modern as well as having a very classic sort of foundation to it. It's also got a really sensitive look at dealing with Alzheimer's, as Fionn's granddad is dealing with this disease, and it's a really sensitive, moving look at that disease and dealing with it from the perspective of a child. If you like literary middle grade that has the feel of a modern classic, books like Kieran Millward-Hargrave, Catherine Rundell or Piers Torday, then I definitely think you should look out for The Stormkeeper's Island, which is published in the summer. Okay, my penultimate book is an adult novel, and it's still one of the best things I've read so far this year. Now we're into May, and it's a novel called The Immortalists by American author Chloe Benjamin, which came out from Tinder Press earlier this year. It opens in the late 60s in New York when the 4 Gold siblings go to a woman who tells them when they're going to die, the exact date that they're going to die. It then follows the lives of the 4 siblings, and it's basically about how you would choose to live if you knew when you were going to die, but also, of course, whether this woman knew what she was talking about and what really happens to their lives. This is one of those books that just finds that perfect balance between being really beautiful and having lots of literary worth, but it's also incredibly readable proper page turner and it's incredibly moving. It did make me cry several times. It's quite a cathartic read at times, and it does make you think about obviously how you would live if you thought you knew when you were going to die. It also explores sibling relationships really beautifully, and I have a particular soft spot for novels that do that. If you like books that are plotty but literary, span lots of time and really like negotiate family relationships, then definitely have a look for The Immortalists. And the last book is a memoir that, even though I read it a couple of months ago now, has really, really stuck with me and had a really profound effect on me. The book is Educated by Tara Westover, and it tells the story of her childhood. She grew up as a survivalist Mormon in rural America. She didn't have a birth certificate for a long time, she didn't go to school, and it charts her journey through that to where she is now, which is having received a PhD from Cambridge University. I found this an incredibly powerful read. For one, she's just a very, very good writer, but also it's an incredibly sensitive, intelligent and generous portrayal of growing up in extreme and difficult and traumatic situations and making peace with that. I found this to be an incredibly powerful and beautiful read, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it to anybody really. But it particularly reminded me of books like The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson or Days of Rain by Rebecca Stott. So there is everything that I read in February, March and what I made of it. I'm sorry it is a little bit delayed, but I still hope it was useful and interesting. Obviously many of these books are new releases, or some of them haven't even come out yet. I'd love to know if you've read any of them, what you made of them, or what you read instead, and I will try to be back in a much more timely manner with what I have been reading recently. Please remember to like the video and subscribe, and I will see you soon.